Listen closely. Do you hear that? It's the sound of 1,000 wedding rings hitting bathroom tiles at 3 a.m. The echo of deleted text messages. The whisper of resumes updated in secret. In the blue light of a phone screen while she sleeps beside you, unaware that you've already begun your escape. There's a story they tell in the forgotten corners of Prague about a museum that only opens when the moon is new. Inside, they keep the promises men made when they still believed in forever. Row after row of glass cases, each containing a different species of extinct hope. Here, the promise to always make her laugh, preserved like a Victorian butterfly, its wings still spread in perpetual readiness for a joke that will never land. There, the vow to be enough, suspended in formaldehyde, bloated and unrecognizable. The curator is a man who hasn't slept since 1987. He'll tell you, if you buy him enough absinthe, that the most popular exhibit is the Hall of Provider Myths, where they keep the fossilized remains of the belief that a man's worth is measured in his ability to give. Give money. Give time. Give attention. Give until there's nothing left but a hollow space where a person used to be. But here's the savage joke, he'll wheeze, green liquid dribbling down his chin. They never tell you that the more you give, the less you're worth. Supply and demand, my friend. Basic economics applied to the human soul. Schopenhauer saw it coming, this peculiar arithmetic of modern love. Men as walking ATMs, emotional support animals with mortgages. He wrote, with his characteristic venom, that a man in love is like a compass near a magnet. He loses all sense of his true direction. But what he didn't foresee was that we'd build an entire civilization on that loss of direction. That we'd call it romance, that we'd teach boys to measure their value in their usefulness to others, then wonder why they crack like eggshells under the weight. I knew a man once, let's call him Marcus, though that wasn't his name, who kept a spreadsheet of everything he'd done for his wife. Not out of resentment, he insisted, but out of love. Every flower bought, every dish washed, every time he bit his tongue instead of speaking his mind. The spreadsheet grew to 10,000 rows before she left him for a guitarist who couldn't remember her birthday. I don't understand, Marcus whispered to me over bourbon that tasted like regret. I did everything right. And there's the grotesque beauty of it. He had done everything right, according to the manual they hand boys when they're too young to read the fine print. Be useful, be needed, be everything except yourself. The Museum of Dead Promises has a new wing now, built during the lockdowns of the early 2020s. They call it the Gallery of Digital Ghosts. Here they preserve the final texts of men who thought they were irreplaceable. I can change. Just tell me what you need. I'll do anything. Each message hovering in its case like a moth that flew too close to the light and got frozen in that final desperate moment of hope. A study from 2024, I forget which university, they all blur together like watercolors in rain, found that 73% of men in relationships reported feeling like they were constantly auditioning for a role they'd already won. Every day, a new performance review. Every gesture, weighted and measured. Every failure to mind read, cataloged for future reference. But here's what the study didn't capture. The strange liberation that comes when you stop auditioning, when you realize the theater is empty, has always been empty, and you've been performing for ghosts. There's a freedom in disposability, though it tastes like ashes at first. The freedom of the man who finally understands that his worth was never in what he could provide, but in what he could withstand. The freedom of looking in the mirror and seeing not a provider, not a protector, not a walking wallet or an emotional garbage disposal, but just a human being, flawed, finite, free. Tell me something. When was the last time someone asked you what you needed? Not what you could give, not what you could fix, not how you could help, but what you, in your private devastation, actually needed? I'll wait. Still waiting. The Museum of Dead Promises has a gift shop, naturally. They sell replicas of the most popular exhibits, miniature promise rings that dissolve in water, greeting cards with nothing written inside, picture frames that only reflect back darkness. The best seller is a mirror that shows you not who you are, but who you were before you started believing you had to earn the right to exist. Sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet enough to hear your own thoughts, you might catch a glimpse of him. That person you were before the performance began. He's still there, waiting, patient as the abandoned dog, ready to love you back if you'd only stop trying to be worth loving. But that's a different kind of promise altogether, isn't it? The kind they don't keep in museums. The kind that might actually be worth keeping. Where love is weighed by the pound, and men always come up short. There's a butcher shop in Buenos Aires that never closes. The meat is always fresh, they say, though no one has ever seen a delivery truck. The scale behind the counter is made of brass and sorrow. And if you look closely at the dial, you'll notice it doesn't measure in pounds or kilograms, but in sacrifices. The butcher himself is a woman with hands like winter and a smile that cuts deeper than her cleaver. She'll weigh anything you bring her, your ambitions, your dreams, that promotion you turned down to spend more time with her. She'll wrap them in white paper, tie them with string, and hand them back to you with a price you can't afford to pay. Love, she'll tell you, wiping blood that might be yours on her apron, is the economy of flesh. Someone always pays in pounds. I think about this when I scroll through dating profiles at 2 a.m., each bio a menu of requirements. 6 feet or taller, 6 figures or stay home, 6-pack abs or 6 feet under. Metaphorically speaking, of course. We've turned romance into a farmer's market, where men display their credentials like produce, hoping someone will find them ripe enough to take home. But here's the thing about produce. It rots. Always. Without exception. Schopenhauer understood this with the clarity of a man who'd weighed himself on every scale and come up wanting. He wrote that desire was a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom, never finding rest. But what he perhaps didn't anticipate was how we'd industrialize that pendulum, mass produce it, package it with a bow, and call it modern dating. Consider this delicious irony. A 2023 study from the Journal of Contemporary Relationships found that women rated emotional availability as the most important quality in a partner. The same study found that men who displayed high emotional availability were 67% more likely to be categorized as friend material rather than romantic partners. It's like being hired for your cooking skills and then being told to stay out of the kitchen. I once watched a man literally disappear at a dinner party. Not all at once. That would have been merciful. But piece by piece, concession by concession, until all that remained was a smile and a credit card. His name was, actually, I can't remember his name. That's how thoroughly he'd erased himself. His girlfriend spoke for him, ordered for him, explained his opinions before he could form them. By dessert, he was translucent. By coffee, completely gone. He's so supportive, she beamed, addressing the empty chair where he used to exist. And he was. Supportive like a foundation that nobody notices until it cracks. The butcher's scale of affection has a special setting for these men. The ones who've been weighed so many times, they've worn down to nothing. The needle spins wildly, unable to find purchase on absence. Sometimes it lands on not enough, sometimes on too much, but never ever on just right. Because here's the secret the butcher whispers to her favorite customers. The ones who've paid in so much flesh, there's barely enough left to hold their bones together. The scale is rigged, always has been. The game is not to win, but to realize you're playing with loaded dice in a casino that prints its own money. There's an old Estonian folktale about a merchant who loved a woman so deeply, he sold everything he owned to buy her gifts. His shop, his home, his horse, his boots. Finally, standing naked in the snow with one last copper coin, he asked her what more he could give. "You're suffering," she said. "I want to know you hurt for me." So he stood there, freezing, believing his pain was proof of love. He died, of course. They found him in spring when the snow melted, still clutching that copper coin. The woman had moved on by then, married a blacksmith who gave her nothing but made her laugh. The tale ends with a moral that roughly translates to, "The fool feeds the fire with his own bones and wonders why he's cold." But I prefer the version where the merchant's ghost opens a competing butcher shop, where he weighs men's hearts and tells them the truth, that they're perfect at exactly the weight they are, that love shouldn't require you to carve pieces of yourself away until you fit someone else's appetite. A philosopher once asked me, it might have been at a conference or in a dream, or in that liminal space between last call and sunrise, what if the reason modern men feel disposable is because they've been taught to dispose of themselves? I didn't have an answer then, but I do now. Walk with me past the butcher shop window. See your reflection in the glass. Notice how it's whole, unbutchered, unweighed. That's you before you learn to put yourself on the scale. Before you learn to measure your worth in pounds of flesh given away. Some say the butcher's shop is just a metaphor, that there's no such place in Buenos Aires or anywhere else. But I've seen the scars on too many men to believe that. I've seen the hollow spaces where they've carved away everything inconvenient, everything difficult, everything real. So here's my question for you. Whispered like a conspiracy in a world that profits from your self-destruction. What would happen if you simply refused to step on the scale? If you walked past the shop, kept your flesh, kept your bones, kept the difficult weight of being wholly yourself? What if disposability is just another word for freedom, badly translated? Where dead men speak louder than the living ever could. Every Sunday at 3 a.m., in the basement of an abandoned department store, they hold a séance for fathers who never learned to speak. The medium is a man who hasn't seen his own son in 7 years. He lights candles that smell like motor oil and disappointed birthdays, arranges chairs in a circle that never quite closes, and waits for the ghosts to arrive. They always do. First comes the specter of the father who expressed love through overtime shifts, who said, "I love you," in mortgage payments and life insurance policies. His ghost still wears a tie, loosened at the collar like a noose he never quite escaped. He tries to speak, but only stock quotes come out. Then the father who spoke fluent silence, who mastered every language except the one his children needed to hear. His ghost brings gifts, phantom bicycles, evaporating college funds, approval that arrives 20 years too late to matter. "We did our best," they whisper in unison, a chorus of the emotionally constipated. "With the tools we were given?" But here's the beautiful, terrible truth. They were given no tools at all. Just a blueprint for a machine that produces money and expects nothing in return. A schematic for a human ATM with a pulse. Schopenhauer, that patron saint of the emotionally austere, wrote that life is suffering punctuated by boredom. But he never attended a séance for silent fathers. Never saw how suffering compounds across generations, like interest on a loan you never asked for. How a son inherits his father's silence like a genetic disease, passes it on to his own children like a cursed heirloom nobody wants, but everyone keeps. I remember my grandfather's funeral. The eulogy was a list of his job titles. 40 years at the same company, never missed a day, provided for his family. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that never quite caught. Afterwards, my grandmother found love letters he'd written but never sent, stored in a shoebox in the garage between tax returns and warranty cards. Hundreds of them, to her. 60 years of unsent devotion, archived and alphabetized. I never knew. She wept into tissues that dissolved like sugar in rain. The medium at the seance tells me there's been a change recently. The ghosts are getting younger. Men in their 30s, 40s, still warm from life, arriving with fresh confusion about how they ended up here. They carry smartphones that display unread text messages from their children. "Dad, are you okay? Haven't heard from you in a while. Mom says you're working late again." A 2024 study from the Institute of Modern Masculinity, yes, that's apparently a real thing now, found that 82% of fathers reported feeling like strangers in their own homes. Like guests who'd overstayed their welcome, but didn't know how to leave. The same study found that children of emotionally absent fathers were 3.5 times more likely to become emotionally absent fathers themselves. The math is simple and devastating. Silence multiplied by silence equals a void that swallows generations. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where Schopenhauer's pessimism cracks like ice under spring sun. Some of the ghosts are starting to learn. They're taking classes, can you imagine? Dead men learning to say, "I love you," in languages they never knew existed. Emotional Mandarin for beginners. Conversational vulnerability. Advanced apology with a minor in active listening. There's one ghost who's gotten quite good at it. He practices on the other spirits, tells them about his fears, his failures. The time he cried in his car after his daughter's recital because he was too proud to cry in public. The other ghosts listen with the fascination of tourists in a foreign country, trying to understand the customs. "Is it supposed to hurt this much?" one asks, his hand over where his heart used to be. "Yes," says the teaching ghost. That's how you know it's working. I met a man last month who attends his own seance while still alive. Every Sunday at 3 a.m., he sits in that circle and practices being dead, just to see what it feels like. He tells me it's therapeutic, like exposure therapy for emotional paralysis. He's learning to haunt himself before it's too late to change the story. "I figure," he says, lighting a candle that smells like the cologne his father wore, "if I can talk to my own ghost, maybe I can talk to my son." The medium nods approval. He's seen stranger things than living men at a seance for the dead. He's seen fathers and sons have entire conversations using only grocery lists. He's seen grown men discover they've been saying, "I love you" all along, just in a frequency only dogs and the deeply desperate can hear. Here's the thing about silence. It's not empty. It's full. Full of everything you meant to say, everything you thought they already knew, everything you were saving for the perfect moment that never came. The seance of silent fathers is just a room where all that unsaid love goes to wait, hoping someone will finally claim it. So let me ask you something, and I want you to think about this with the full weight of your accumulated silence. If you attended your own seance tomorrow, what would your ghost say? What messages would echo in that basement, undelivered and urgent? What love would leak from your phantom lips, finally freed from the prison of masculine stoicism? More importantly, and this is the real question, the one that keeps the medium awake at night, why are you waiting until you're dead to say it? The candles are burning lower now. The ghosts are getting restless. Somewhere, a child is waiting for a text that says more than okay or busy right now. Somewhere, a father is sitting in his car, engine running, thumb hovering over send, practicing being brave. The seance never really ends. It just moves locations, from basement to bedroom, from graveyard to grocery store, from silence to silence, until someone finally breaks the spell. Will it be you? Where every reflection shows you who you were supposed to be. There's a carnival that only sets up in abandoned shopping mall parking lots. No advertisements, no schedule. It simply appears when a critical mass of male disappointment reaches its boiling point in any given suburb. The ticket booth is manned by a teenager who looks exactly like you did at 17, back when you still believed in yourself. He charges no admission, just asks you to leave your expectations at the gate. They're too heavy, he explains, with your old smile. You'll want to travel light for this. The main attraction is the Hall of Broken Mirrors. Each one salvaged from the bathroom where a man first realized he'd become his father, or worse, less than his father. They're arranged in a maze that spells out the word success from above, though you can't see that from inside. All you see are fractures, each crack representing a different version of who you could have been. In the first mirror, you at 25, still believing you'd change the world. Look how his eyes shine with purpose. See how he stands straighter, unburdened by compromise. He doesn't know yet that the world changes you first, slowly, imperceptibly, like erosion on a coastline you visit every summer, but never quite notice until the house falls into the sea. In the second, the man she wanted you to become. Successful but not intimidating. Emotional but not needy. Strong but not threatening. Ambitious but always home for dinner. It's like looking at a police sketch drawn by committee. Technically accurate, but somehow inhuman. This version of you smiles with all his teeth, but none of his soul. The third mirror is cracked so badly you can barely make out the image. It shows you at your father's age, and the resemblance is devastating. Not just physical, that was always inevitable, but the way you hold disappointment in your shoulders, carry exhaustion in your jaw. The way you've learned to say, "I'm fine," with such conviction that even you believe it. That one's popular, says the carnival barker, a woman in a fortune teller's costume who claims she can read futures but only tells the past. Men spend hours there, trying to spot the differences. Spoiler alert, there aren't as many as you'd hope. Schopenhauer would have loved this carnival. He understood that life was a series of illusions, each more elaborate than the last. But even he might have been surprised by the funhouse mirror quality of modern masculinity. How we're expected to be simultaneously everything and nothing. To perform strength while experiencing weakness. To provide answers while drowning in questions. A 2025 study from the University of Somewhere Important found that men spend an average of 4.7 hours per week comparing themselves to idealized versions of masculinity. That's 244 hours a year staring at a standard that shifts like smoke every time you think you've grasped it. The same study found that these comparisons correlate with increased rates of anxiety, depression, and what researchers clinically term existential fuck-it-all syndrome. But here's where the carnival of broken mirrors reveals its dark magic. Past the hall, beyond the funhouse, through a tent that smells like cedar and shattered expectations, there's one last mirror. It's not broken. It's not warped. It's devastatingly, brilliantly clear. It shows you exactly as you are. Most men run from this mirror. They prefer the broken ones, the ones that fragment them into manageable pieces, each flaw isolated and contained. But those who stay, those who dare to look without flinching, report something extraordinary. They see beauty in their damage. I met a man there once. Let's call him everyone, because he could have been. Who'd been staring at himself for 3 hours. Not from vanity, but from a kind of shocked recognition. He'd spent 43 years believing he was failing at being a man, only to realize he'd been succeeding at being human. "Look," he said, grabbing my arm with the urgency of the newly converted. "Look at these hands. They've failed at things, built things, broken things, held my daughter when she cried about boys, made terrible pancakes every Sunday for 15 years because my kids pretend to like them. These aren't the hands of the man I was supposed to be. They're better. They're real." The fortune teller finds us there, distributing cotton candy that tastes like regret and somehow makes you feel better. She tells us the secret of the carnival, the one thing management doesn't want you to know. Every broken mirror can be fixed, but sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in. It's a cliche wrapped in a Leonard Cohen reference wrapped in a carnival game. But sometimes the truth comes dressed in borrowed clothes. Sometimes you need the fun house to show you that your house was always fun. You just forgot how to play in it. The carousel here runs backwards. The strongman game measures emotional weight instead of physical force. The tunnel of love is just a quiet room where you can sit with yourself without judgment or Wi-Fi. Everything is inverted, subverted, teaching you that maybe you've been reading the map upside down all along. As I leave, the teenager at the ticket booth, the one who looks like young me, like young you, like young everyone who thought they'd be different, hands me a prize. It's a pocket mirror, small and perfect and completely intact. "For the road," he says, "in case you forget what you really look like." I keep it in my wallet between credit cards I can't afford to use and business cards for jobs that no longer define me. Sometimes in bathroom stalls at parties where I'm performing happiness. In cars idling outside homes I'm not sure I belong in. I take it out. I look. I remember. The carnival of broken mirrors doesn't really exist, of course. It's just a story we tell ourselves about the places we go to compare our insides to everyone else's outsides. But the mirrors are real. They're in every gym, every office building, every social media feed where men display their best angles and hide their worst truths. So here's my challenge to you, whispered like a carnival barker's promise. Stop looking in broken mirrors, expecting to see yourself whole. Stop measuring your reflection against men who don't exist. Standards that shift like funhouse floors. Expectations that were never yours to begin with. Find one clear mirror. Look into it without flinching. See the man you are. Flawed, striving, real. That's the greatest show on earth. That's the only ticket worth buying. The carnival is always leaving town, but it's also always arriving. The question is, which mirror will you choose to look in tomorrow? And more importantly, will you finally see what's been there all along? But somehow, that's where life begins. At the edge of the city, where the last streetlight gives up and the darkness gets honest, there's a garden where nothing grows. The soil is salted with the tears of men who've tried everything. The fence is built from rejection letters, divorce papers, and performance reviews that say, meets expectations, when what they mean is disappointing. The gate is always open because the owner knows that locked doors are just invitations to climb walls. The gardener is a man who failed at everything before he succeeded at nothing. He'll show you around if you bring him black coffee and agree not to mention hope. His hands are dirty with the kind of earth that refuses seeds, rejects water, spits back every attempt at cultivation. People think a garden is about growth, he says, gesturing at the magnificent emptiness. But sometimes it's about accepting the seasons of death. I found this place after my third therapist gave up, after the self-help books started repeating themselves. After I realized that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't that I was broken. but that I was trying to grow in soil meant for someone else's flowers. The garden has sections marked not by what grows there, but by what doesn't. Here, the plot of dead ambitions, where men bury careers that looked good on paper but felt like slow suffocation. There, the bed of extinct relationships, mulched with love letters that became legal documents. In the corner, my favorite, the grove of unplanted potential. All the things you could have been if you hadn't been so busy trying to be what they needed. Schopenhauer would have understood this garden. He knew that life was about managing suffering, not eliminating it. That wisdom came not from answers, but from better questions. He wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." In other words, you can't force flowers in a garden meant for stones. But here's the savage beauty of it. Here's what the gardener shows me as we walk paths made of crushed expectations. In the absence of growth, something else emerges. Call it peace, call it acceptance, call it the strange liberty that comes when you stop trying to bloom out of season. "Watch," he says, kneeling by a patch of particularly barren earth. "This is where a man planted his need to be needed, watered it with desperation, fed it with his own bone meal. Nothing grew, of course, but look closer." I do. The soil is different here, darker, richer, like it's been composting something profound. That's what happens when you let things die properly, he explains. They become fertilizer for something you haven't imagined yet. A 2024 psychological study, I keep it bookmarked on my phone like a prayer, found that men who experienced what researchers called profound failure were 40 more likely to report life satisfaction 5 years later than those who achieved conventional success. The researchers seemed puzzled by this. They shouldn't have been. They'd never visited the garden where nothing grows. There's a bench in the center of the garden made from the bones of extinct expectations. Men sit there, sometimes for hours, learning the difference between giving up and letting go. It's a crucial distinction. Fine as spider silk, but strong as bridge cables. Giving up is passive, defeated. Letting go is active, revolutionary. It's saying, "I choose not to grow what you're selling." I meet a CEO there once, former CEO. He traded his corner office for a corner of this garden where he sits and reads poetry to the nothing that grows. He tells me he's never been happier. And the terrifying thing is, I believe him. "I spent 20 years climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall," he says, dirt under his manicured nails. "Now I sit on the ground. The view is better from here." The garden has one rule. You can't plant anything. You can only tend to what refuses to grow. It's harder than it sounds. Every instinct screams to fix, to fertilize, to force something green from the ground. But the gardener is patient with newcomers. He's seen thousands of men arrive with pockets full of seeds and leave with hands full of earth. As the sun sets, or rises, time works differently here. The gardener shares his secret. The reason nothing grows in this garden is because everything already grew. This is second soil, exhausted earth, ground that gave everything it had to flowers that were picked for someone else's vase. But here's what nobody tells you about depleted soil, he says, his voice soft as turned earth. It's the most honest ground there is. It can't pretend anymore, can't fake fertility. It just is what it is. And sometimes, that's enough. He shows me a corner I hadn't noticed before. It's not empty like the rest. There's something there, but it's not growing. It's just being. A strange plant that neither blooms nor dies, neither reaches up nor digs down. It simply exists, sufficient unto itself. That's you, he says. That's every man who finds this garden. Not growing, not dying, just finally, fully, unapologetically present. The moon rises over the garden where nothing grows. And in its silver light, I see the truth that Schopenhauer glimpsed but couldn't quite articulate. Sometimes the best thing you can cultivate is the courage to stop cultivating. Sometimes the most radical act is to let your field lie fallow, to trust that emptiness is not the same as worthlessness. As I leave, the gardener hands me a packet. Inside, nothing. Beautiful, liberating nothing. Plant these wherever you've been trying too hard, he advises. Water them with acceptance. Watch what doesn't happen. It's magnificent. I keep that empty packet in my pocket. When someone asks what I'm growing these days, I show them nothing, and I smile. They usually back away, confused and slightly concerned. But occasionally, rarely, beautifully, someone's eyes light up with recognition. "You've been to the garden," they whisper. "We all have," I reply. "Some of us just learned to stop leaving." So here's my final question for you, posed at the edge of everything and nothing. What if your disposability is really just the universe trying to tell you that you're recyclable? That you can break down everything you thought you were and become soil for something unimaginable? What if the garden where nothing grows is actually the only place where you can finally, actually, authentically grow? What if Schopenhauer was right about the suffering, but wrong about the point? What if the point isn't to minimize suffering, but to mulch it? To let it decompose into something rich and strange and yours? What if modern men aren't disposable at all? What if we're just biodegradable, waiting for the right conditions to transform into something the world has never seen? The garden where nothing grows is waiting. The gate is open. The coffee is black. The gardener is patient. The only question is, are you ready to stop blooming for everyone else and start composting for yourself? Are you ready to discover what grows in the space between disposed and reborn? The end.